Okay, and I think we should be live. Welcome, sir, Mr. Fraser
Hi there.
MacLean, joining us on another episode of the Toon Room podcast. Fraser's worked on some pretty big titles that, man, I grew up on, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, like Tarzan, Mulan, I think. Am I right in saying
No,
Mulan?
not
No,
Milan. So the other one was Space Jam.
Space Jam. There you go.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
oh, I got a little bit confused. You were talking about Mulan and in some of the other research that I did, and I guess I
yeah.
accepted myself.
Milan was wrapping up as we were getting started on Tarzan. So one of the first things that I did was I got sent to Florida for a week to shadow Jeff Dutton, who was their artistic coordinator, and just
Yeah,
to follow. I mean, we had a very kind of different pipeline because of all the deep canvas innovations and uh, some of the things that hadn't been tested or tried before. But it was interesting to see, to spend a week at the Florida studio, which lasted all the way through to Lilo and Stitch. I think was that the last thing that
yeah.
Florida Disney did?
I
Can't
I
remember.
wouldn't know. I don't know. Um,
But yeah, when I was
um,
working at Tarzan, they had the three studios. They had Tarzan being animated in Paris, Jane being animated
yeah,
in Burbank. They had the Florida. So yeah, Paris, Florida, and Burbank. They had the three feature studios.
yeah. Well, listen. Thank you for being here. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm ready to learn. Every time we speak, I learn something new.
So most of it completely useless and inapplicable.
Yeah, well, sometimes random trivia is good to have in your back pocket. Anyway,
Oh,
for
full of
those
random trivia.
yeah for those people listening, Fraser is also the author of the book Setting the Scene, which has talks extensively about layout, and I think it's a very, very interesting topic and a huge one. You wouldn't think,
Still, yeah.
but if you think about it, if you actually think about it,
Oh,
and it is that
only last
idea of
week
what,
I had somebody, another person. This happens so regularly, saying, "Oh yeah, I'm working for a company that got rid of layout because they think it would be, they thought it would be
yeah,
a way to save money and save time." And it's like,
yeah,
okay,
false economy, right? But
I,
yeah, and
terrible
I
false
suppose
economy.
I suppose it's also what do you specifically mean when you say layout, right? What does that actually mean?
That's the title of the first chapter. What do you mean by
Yeah, I
layout?
know.
Because
So yeah,
even before all of the kind of split personality stuff with, is it 2D, is it 3D, is it, I
yeah.
mean, to begin with, one of the things to me that is a complete misconception or a complete misnomer is referring to traditional hand drawn animation as 2D. It is the most aggressively three-dimensional thing that the human brain can possibly tackle.
Hmm.
And it's thanks, I guess, to a lot of the XY axis 2D cutout animation that we've gotten used to on television that yeah, that's 2D. But as God is my witness, Tom and Jerry
Yeah.
isn't, and Snow
Yes.
White isn't.
Right.
They're
Right.
very, very volumetric, three-dimensional perspective exercises, and
Immersive in that sense. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of what was required for all the multiplane shots, but even for some of the simpler single compound table shots, was a kind of arithmetic that broke down parallax into how you build that illusion of theatrical depth that you see all the way through from Snow White and the Old Mill to, I mean, they were still using the multiplane in the 50s and 60s a little bit. And there were, I
Yeah.
think, eventually there were three of the multiplane cameras. One of them is in the Frank Wells building on the Disney lot. Another one is in the Disney Family Museum in the Presidio, and I believe there was one in Paris as well. I could be wrong, but I mean
Hmm.
that technology was. I mean, it just drives me crazy. People talking of it
Yeah.
as 2D
Yeah.
because it
Uh,
wasn't.
right. That was the whole idea behind it, right? It's trying to get people
Yeah.
in as much as they could.
Yeah, and
So
if
listen,
you look at what the Fleischer brothers did with their stereoptical process, where they had that rotating table with the architectural miniatures and the forced perspective and the vanishing point in the center, they were uh, at the same time as Ub Iwerks and Disney were developing this theatrical depth for feature cartoons and for shorts. There was a real kind of conceit that swept in the 1990s with the digital revolution, that there were just all these there was an abundance of gifts that the computer technology was offering to these poor peasants who were working with pencils and paper. And it's
yeah,
it's there today as well, the idea that everything is led by the technology, and it's absolute nonsense. So the layout process is important for that reason, an understanding of it historically and across the wider picture. But also, one of the things that came out when I was interviewing Bill Perkins, who had been mentored by Ken O'Connor. And Ken O'Connor, among other things, was the guy who, in Peter Pan, where they're flying over Tower Bridge and you see the shadow go down from one level of the clouds to another, and you just feel
yeah,
like you're hundreds of feet up in the air. And Ken had said to Bill, the layout department holds the purse strings of the production. And
mm,
somebody contacted me during the pandemic to say they were working on a series in London. Won't name the series, won't name the company, and it was another of those. His opening thing in his email was there was nothing in the budget for layout, and I said,
yeah,
how
yeah,
did they arrive? How did they arrive at a budget without involving an experienced layout supervisor?
right,
Because
yeah,
a layout person can tell you from the available money where you can afford to spend it and where you can't. And the idea that you would say there isn't enough in the budget for layout means you really don't understand what layout, how
yeah.
pivotal layout is in the planning
Yeah,
and
no, I
pre-production.
was, yeah, and I was prepping for this a little bit and listening to your conversation, as I mentioned earlier with Andy from a couple of
Yeah,
years ago, and it
yeah,
is
yeah.
that thing of where it's where a lot of planning can go in it, so that the final consumer, the audience, is not gonna, I think you were talking about, like planning out the shadows and planning out,
Hmm.
those details and how can you get away shooting around certain things and
Yeah,
so on. You can really economize in a good way on effort, and the audience is not gonna feel like, oh, they cut corners here, oh,
nope,
they copped out
nope.
a little bit, or they didn't do the work. So it is crucial in that sense, for sure.
It's a great
So
way of making the audience think they've seen more money than has actually gone onto the screen.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Which
exactly.
is which for smaller studios in particular is absolutely vital.
Oh,
And
man, I can speak from experience. We were about 10 years ago working on a short film, um, which was CGI or 3D, but we definitely bit off more than we could chew. It was like three people in the studio, and having clever layout and
and
having static cameras and not worrying about moving the camera. And we just went, I think we had three moving shots in the whole thing because I
mhm.
couldn't afford to render it. And it just, how can we make every frame beautiful? Like
Well,
static
it
and make it
still
work. And we use the movement of the character
mhm.
to move, to move the story forward, to move the eye where we need it to
Yeah,
be, to
all those
draw the
things.
motion, to set the rhythm. Just use the character rather than moving the camera because we couldn't afford it. So, and in that sense, we really figuring out what the breakdown of each shot is really made it. And then you watch it, and you can, have other critique or other notes, but every few years I go back and I rewatch the project. But if nothing else, you don't feel like you've been cheated. You don't feel like, oh, I
Of
can
course
tell that
not.
every camera is static. I
Yeah.
can tell that they didn't. Oh, where's the Spielberg shot? Where's the? That's not in there. I want to see some move. Like, it doesn't. It works, right? So it's definitely doing planning and that at that stage kind of made that project possible for us in the first place, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to finish it, for sure.
No, no.
Um, So, as you know, because you've hung out with us a few times and you've talked to me a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
times, in the Toon Room, we're all about the people, and I'm really interested for these sorts of conversations. I'm really, I hopefully I can make them a little bit more intimate than just kind of industry talk. And every guest within the confines of their own boundaries and where the comfort zone ends for them. But I always ask a little bit of background because I find that everybody in the industry, animation or animation adjacent, have such interesting stories of how they kind of ended up where they are or ended up doing what they ended up really passionate about a certain thing. Like, we're talking about layout. I'm sure the
Mhm.
path to that and the path to the inception or the idea of, oh man, I should put this together and I should really formulate something for, I don't know, posterity or just to get it out of my system. I'm sure
Yeah.
that path was interesting. So I was curious to ask you, like, how did you get your start in the industry? What did you want to be or do when we were younger? Were you thinking about animation at all, or
I was
was it
thinking a
something
lot
else?
about animation, but the world I was born into, I was born in London in 1961, and
Hmm.
the reason, because my family is from Scotland, and my father was a journalist, my mother was a school teacher, and the daily left wing paper that my dad worked on for 10 years in the 1950s closed down. And
Mm.
actually, my dad's career, both my parents' careers really shaped a lot of my childhood, a lot of my adult life. Um, my father had a very interesting relationship with technology, um,
Okay.
because which
I'm sure
started
there's a funny story coming.
well. It had a really strong influence on how come I got involved with the computer technology in the 1990s.
Hmm.
Um, as a teenager, he volunteered for the Air Corps in his high school and in his university, and then the war broke out, and he volunteered to be in the RAF in the final years of World War II, and wound up as a radar mechanic on the ground in Libya for the
Oh.
last year and a half of the war. And that was because his eyesight was not good enough for him to be a pilot. And he took the eye
Mm.
test with his good eye and was caught cheating it by memory on his bad eye. And so and initially there was no word for radar. It was a new technology. So
Right.
he was a radio and radar mechanic, and he was on the ground, and their job was to like refit the planes that were coming in and out of the combat zones. And and then when he went into journalism in the early 1950s on a paper called the Glasgow Bulletin. But he was also one of the first television presenters in Scotland. And he and his
Oh,
brother,
really?
yeah, and he and his
Wow.
brother were very heavily involved with BBC Scotland. And they used to have, by regulation, the BBC on a Sunday evening had what was called the God slot. And because they were the sons of a church minister in the
Mm.
Highlands, my father hosted a religious conversation program called Meeting Point. And one of the most wonderful things that I got to do shortly before my father died, there was no videotape. So what he would do when he was on the television, my mom would put this old Philips reel-to-reel tape recorder in front of the TV, and the BBC would do the same thing, and they would have a typescript of the dialogue in the thing. But
Yeah.
on special occasions, if they had a guest that they thought was of historical importance or whatever, they had a synchronized 16 millimeter camera that they could set up that wouldn't strobe with the cathode ray
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah.
And in 1959 or 1960, I think 1959, he interviewed Pastor Martin Niemöller, who was the guy behind. They came for the trade unionists. I wasn't a trade unionist. So I said nothing. They came for the Jews. I wasn't Jewish. I said so. He was deemed to be of such importance, and my father knew there had been a film recording of it, but it had never been found. And I have a friend who worked in radio coverage, parliamentary coverage on BBC Radio, a friend called Patrick Gregory in London, and he entered the date of broadcast and the information about the producer, and they found it. So my
Oh
dad, I
wow.
got to show him a DVD
Oh,
of
that's so
him
nice.
interviewing. So the crazy thing was that when the commercial television channels launched, it took away all the advertising revenue from print media. So
Hmm.
by helping pioneer television, my father tore the ground out from under himself, and the newspaper that he was working on was so dependent on advertising revenue, it shut down.
Shut
And the
down.
company
Yeah.
that owned it, the only way he could carry on as a journalist was to move to London. So part of what has had an impact on me is that I've never been considered authentically Scottish. I was made fun of from the moment I set foot in school because I talked like that. I was like a South London boy, you know. I had a like
Hmm.
South London accent, and nobody in Edinburgh could understand me. And I always drew. I always made pictures. I have two older brothers who were not interested so much in art, but I had a maternal grandmother, a paternal, both my grandmothers, uh, aunties, and a cousin who's been a huge influence on me. My cousin Brian, who's like 15 years older, who was kind of like the number one son. Um, and all through my childhood, I was surrounded by people who would occasionally sketch or paint. But there was a definitive occasion when we went on holiday in the 1960s. And we used to go to Cromarty in the northeast of Scotland and rent this big house called Rosenberg, which had a rose bush outside the front door. And I came down one morning just before breakfast, and my cousin Brian was sitting with a set of Caran d'Ache pencils doing this
Yeah.
exquisite realistic drawing of one of the roses. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want to do this. Like, this is whatever this is. And as soon as my mom and dad figured that that was the thing that was most important to me, they tuned into what was important to all three of us. And they would try and, you know, get books through Reader's Digest or things in support of what we were interested in. And I was
Yeah.
so
That's
focused
nice.
on art. I got sent when I was 12 years old to a high school that had an entire building that was just designated for art and design. Now, show me the high school that does that. You know, there's all kinds of investment in science labs, in sports facilities, in music. There are very
Yeah.
few high schools anywhere on the planet that deem visual communication to be of equal importance. And the thing that was ringing in your ears in the 60s and 70s, if you were interested in art, was you'll never make a living. And
Yeah.
my mom and dad never discouraged me. And indeed, they, by moving me to this school where there was this wonderful art teacher called Mike Gill and other people, there was another teacher called Ian Coots, a wonderful woman who created this history of animation, history of art curriculum called Rosemary Schofield. There were just all these people who were really trying to get young kids to take art seriously. We had kilns, we had enameling, ceramics, printmaking,
Oh,
textiles,
nice.
just it. And this was high school. So, but even with all of that backing and support, I was one of only two kids in my year who went to art school instead of university. And then when I
Hmm.
was at art school, I went into the Department of Graphic Design because there was no animation training. There was one
Yeah.
animation course in Scotland, but where colleges used to teach animation, it was very much a kind of boutique art thing. It wasn't, you know, in London, you had companies like Bura and Hardwick and Filmfare that were doing stop motion for kids' TV. I watched Hanna-Barbera when I came home from school. I watched Tom and Jerry in the evenings. That we had a thing on Sunday called the Glenn Michael Cartoon Cavalcade, and they had the franchise for all the Looney Tunes and the Spider-Man commercials. Sorry, the Spider-Man shorts. So But the thing about Disney, the thing about Disney was you had to buy like the radio times or the TV times, which were the TV listings for the week. And I'm not making this up. You only got to see Disney at Christmas or Easter or during the holidays. Occasionally on the weekend, they would buy in like the Wonderful World of Disney, and you would see some of the behind the scenes stuff. But usually, it was only at Christmas or the
Yeah.
big holidays. And they would have this Disney special where they would have like 5 minutes of Jungle Book, 5 minutes of Peter Pan, and 5 minutes of Robin Hood or the
Oh,
Rescuers or whatever the most
like a tasting
like
menu.
a
That's
taster.
interesting.
And people would take a ballpoint pen and they would draw round when the Disney special was going to be on. I swear to God, if you
Oh
went out
wow.
into the street while that was on TV, the streets were empty. Like
Yeah.
it was a huge, phenomenal thing. And the first time I got to see Disney in color, because we just had black and white TV,
Yeah.
my mom had seen Fantasia in the 1950s. And she saw that it was coming to a little cinema called the Cameo, which is still Edinburgh's oldest cinema. It's been there since 1914. And when I was 8 years old, she took me on a Saturday afternoon. My dad didn't want to go, my brothers didn't want to go, and my mother was had this encyclopedic knowledge of classical music, and she was a trained classical singer as well as being a school teacher. And she had described the movie to me before we got in there. But when it actually came on the screen, I swear to God, we left and it was a rainy, grey Edinburgh Saturday afternoon. But my entire sensory system had been completely rebooted by the time I'd seen Fantasia on a
Sure.
big screen.
On a
And
big
everything
screen, yeah.
smelled different, everything looked different, everything sounded different. And that combined with the magic of watching what my cousin was capable of capturing with these colored pencils and capturing what was right in front of him. While I was an art student, I only ever heard Walt Disney's name as an insult. And my teachers
Why? Because it's
because it was
commercial
commercial.
or
It was commercial. It
right.
was vulgar. It wasn't art. And there was
Yes.
no film or animation thing at the Glasgow School of Art while I was there. So for 3 whole years, I was twice urged, begged to leave the graphic design department because I was such a nuisance. And the school had bought a video camera, by the 80s definition of
Yeah.
portable video.
Yeah.
And I was a student kind of in that gray area between the Bohemian Rhapsody video and the start of MTV. So I told them, if you're going to let the other students design album sleeves for their favorite bands, I want to do music videos. So I carried on doing all of the life drawing and the perspective and the still life and the portraiture. I just stopped showing it to the tutors because it always made them so angry. And they were always telling me that nobody does this anymore, nobody needs this. And I wound
But
up.
why were you, if you don't mind interrupting for a second, why did that make them angry? I'm confused. Because
I didn't have a style. It wasn't edgy. It
uh-huh.
wasn't cool. All I wanted to do was learn how to draw like Leonardo da Vinci or Raphael, or I wanted those Renaissance skills
So they were
because I
looking at
knew
that and they were feeling that it's a little bit like it's an outdated exercise. Find your
completely.
own voice, do your own thing, forget about that.
Yeah, and we were told to admire and worship all of the big names of illustration at that time.
Mhm.
If I ran through a list of those names, you wouldn't know who I was talking about.
Oh, for sure.
Because the whole thing about cool is by definition, it's cool this year, and in six
Yes.
months' time, it's not. And the only career advice we ever got in all the departments across design and fine art was get famous. Be a famous painter, be a famous fashion designer, be a
Hmm.
famous photographer.
That's
But there was
great advice, isn't it?
no real life. And the people I know, the people who were my peers and contemporaries who did get famous, it usually didn't end well,
Right.
because being famous comes with all this really toxic baggage for your
And
personal life.
also, nobody prepares you for that either.
Nobody prepares you for it. And I was recommended to apply for the Scottish Film Training Trust when I graduated from art school because
Okay.
the ACTT, which was the union that controlled the cinema and TV industries, in a country of 5 million people, each year they would only allow 3 new people into the industry. And
Oh.
the training that was available, you couldn't get the experience without a union card. You couldn't get a union card without the experience. And if anybody dared to hire non-union talent, they would shut down the production. I mean, it was a complete closed shop. So each year you could train, you could apply. I was one of about 200 people in Scotland that year, 1983, who applied to be either a camera operator, a sound recordist, or a film editor. And because of all the mistakes that I'd made, greatly to the frustration of this amazing technician called Lynn Bogan, who was working the offline edit stuff when I was there, I knew that the cutting room was the boiler room of the whole movie making process. And I
Hmm.
applied and I got interviewed and I got taken on. And for a whole year, I worked on 16 millimeter editing for current affairs, news, soap operas, drama, comedy. And Channel 4 had just started up the year before I left. So Channel 4 was investing heavily in all kinds of unusual projects. And then I met somebody at a wedding who was working for Sands Films, who were making this ambitious 6 hour, 2 3 hour cinema movies adapted from Charles Dickens' novel Little Dorrit, and it had Derek Jacobi, Alec Guinness,
Oh,
and I went
big
down and
names.
I ran their cutting room, and for
Hmm.
the 36 weeks that we were filming, because my cutting room in the old warehouse in Rotherhithe was between the costume and makeup department and the cars that took everybody to the soundstage. I had Obi-Wan Kenobi coming through my cutting room every morning with a cup of coffee and a bacon roll, and I thought I was made. And then by the
Yeah.
end of production, all the money in the UK industry had just drained away. And I applied to work on Fish Called Wanda. I applied to work on Baron
Oh, I
Munchausen.
love that
I applied
movie.
to work on the, and nobody even answered my letters because you had to. And I would buy Screen International, this magazine, every week. I would go up into Soho to the one newsagent that sold this movie
So
industry
this, yeah.
magazine, looking for film editing jobs. And one morning on a Monday, I would sit there round the corner from the newsagent with a stack of 10p pieces to go around to the telephone box. And there was a little picture of Mickey Mouse. And it said Disney are looking for experienced personnel for a feature film that's a combination of cartoons and real actors. And I was like, I will make
This
coffee
is for
if I
me.
can work on that.
Yeah.
And I wrote to them and I didn't get a reply because I didn't send them any artwork because I didn't have any animation experience and I'd spent 3 years being told that my drawing was rubbish. And
Yeah.
they didn't reply, and there was no phone number, but there was an address for the forum in Camden. So I got on the
Did
underground
you
and
go knock on the door?
I went into the security guard and I went, I know Disney are in here somewhere, and I know that they have a phone number, and I
Good
need
for
you to
you.
write the phone number down. And I went back to my apartment and I called up and said, you didn't reply. So they put me through to Don Hahn. And either he got my letter out of the trash or he got it out of a filing cabinet. And he came back to the phone and he said, well, you asked to be in the cutting room. We don't need anybody in the cutting room. And you don't. And he turned the page to my resume and he went, just a minute. You were at the art school in Glasgow for 4 years. Can you draw? And I was like, well, yeah, but I don't have any animation experience. He went, I don't care. Can I look at your figure drawing? And 2 hours after that telephone conversation, I was back in the building in his office, and all the artwork that my tutors spent 3 years telling me was shit got me hired by Disney.
Oh, there you go. There you go. What a beautiful story.
So from my father being a
Vindication.
radar mechanic back in the, but the reason that my dad being a radar mechanic was relevant was that after Roger Rabbit, everybody who used animation to sell breakfast cereal or kitchen cleaner or toilet freshener,
Yeah, yeah,
anything where animated characters came off a plastic bottle or off a cardboard
yes,
box onto a kitchen
yeah.
table, they all wanted the animation to look like Roger Rabbit. And my dad had always said to me, it doesn't matter where you are in any of the creative industries, look out for the changes in technology. Yeah, began to see that instead of everything going into the lab and everything being put together by multiple exposure in a optical printer, or everything was being digitized. So we were still sending cell artwork to 35 millimeter rostrum camera houses in London, but that would go to Rush's in Old Compton Street and we would use, they had all the Flash Harry Quantel stuff, but the system that we used was the composite image system, CIS. And we would go in there, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, I either learn how to use this technology or I am going to be
You become
toast.
obsolete. Yeah.
Yeah. And then an advert appeared in the newspaper from Cambridge Animation Systems looking for somebody who was a total moron with computers, but who knew about and had a degree of credibility in hand drawn animation. And my job, I got hired by them in January 1993 to help train other reluctant animation artists how to become computer literate. And then the Animo system, which is the one that we were working on, eventually got bought by Warner Brothers to make Space Jam and by DreamWorks to help make Prince of Egypt. And there were so few people anywhere in the world who knew how to operate the software. Myself and the other
Yeah.
people who were trainers were kind of at a premium. So yeah, I wound up doing
Yeah.
supervising all the departments, helping people firefight and troubleshoot Animo problems in ink and paint, scene planning, animation check, color models on, and then Disney had this role called artistic coordinator, which was very similar, you know, as they were bringing more and more things, more and more digital processes into the pipeline, but they'd run out of people internally who spoke both languages. And my friend Chris
Mm.
Jenkins said, "Oh, I've got a friend over at Warner Brothers who's doing exactly this on Space Jam. You should hire him." And that was how I wound up on Tarzan. So it was that thing of having to take a deep breath and realize that, you know, okay, if I want to get into the movie industry, I can't be an animator. I can't train as a production designer or art director. So I'll be an editor. Then I get in and I'm in the special effects department in Roger Rabbit, putting layer upon layer of shading
Yeah.
effects, all rooted in my observational drawing. And then I'm going around the world training people how to use. And we were the AI of the 1990s. Everybody
Yeah.
thought we were Satan. And
Yeah. I
yeah,
wanted to mention that it's really interesting how you have this experience from times where it did pivot, the technology did change the way things were done, right?
yeah,
More than once.
yeah,
And it's interesting how far back this advice that your father gave you goes in terms of stay on top of it, give yourself that edge,
yep.
you know. And now, lo and behold, we are again at a point in time where it's changing once again.
We're at a much more dangerous point in time. I mean, AI is not uh, the Animo system. It's not the CAP system. It's not the nice, friendly, useful development that was happening. AI, to me, the more I read about it, and I'm reading as much as I can at the moment, what it
Hmm.
reminds me of is what happened after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the Manhattan Project had been developed as a destructive instrument of war. And they ran around like crazy with help from Disney and our friend the Atom. You know, one of the pavilions at the first
Yeah.
Disneyland was all about atomic power. And it was, oh yeah, the reason we were doing this, the reason we were out in the Mojave Desert doing all the blowing all this shit up, we want to give you free electricity. Bullshit. No, you don't. This whole thing was about how to terrorize people. And now we have, you know, Chernobyl, Fukushima. That is still an exceptionally, it was what Einstein referred to as the most expensive and dangerous way ever invented of boiling water. Because that's all you're doing with a nuclear power plant is boiling water.
Right. Yeah, you're making
And
steam. Yeah.
and we have the same thing with AI. This has been developed for entirely predatory reasons. And it's being sold as, oh, ChatGPT can do your homework and, oh, this can speed up the process. No, go away. What you see in the app on your screen and what's happening in these giant data centers, and particularly in a place like Latin America, I just went, as I do, each week to the corner store and I carried a 20-liter garrafon of clean water up the stairs because I have
Yeah.
to, and I have to buy my clean water from Coca Cola. And when I was living in Scotland in the borders, I had to, everything was Scottish water and everything, you know, what AI is. to me, the equivalent, and I was very heavily involved in the anti-nuclear movement when I was a student. I would go on protests outside the submarine base at Faslane on the weekends, and
Okay.
I still hold that it was a colossal error. And what we're everybody's worried now about the nuclear technology for warfare and the depleted uranium that is dropped on people and causes birth defects. And I think if we want to find a comparison for AI, we should not be looking to Alias Wavefront and Maya and Animo and those systems. This is completely different. And it has been developed by the people who are creating this surveillance technology. They're harvesting everything that you're creating. So, my advice to pretty much anybody who is what we're doing at the moment, where I work with Escuela Sena in Mexico, we are going old school on a lot of stuff, and it is having a great impact. We did a workshop in August. We switched all the computers off for 6 days, and the students
Oh,
produced a
nice.
quantity and quality of work that was just unprecedented. And I spent 4 days trying to integrate those same old school pinboard techniques with the short film groups the week before last. And you don't want to go near a computer until you know exactly what you want it to do for you, because it's in the nature of the user interface design and the algorithms that it's once you're inside, you never leave. There's 96 other ways of doing this. So there's a pull down menu and there's a sub menu. And how about doing this? And Rob Cardone, who was in layout at Disney when I was working on Tarzan, I was interviewing him for the book, when he went over to Blue Sky, they couldn't believe that the layout people would do the lighting. And they said, "Oh no, we've got a whole department
Right.
that does that." And he said, "Can I come and see how you do this?" And they took him into a room with this twin monitor display and about six people around the monitor going, "No, no, turn, put a light over here. No, no, oh, no, that doesn't work. Put a light down here." And he was like, guys. And he took a Chinograph pen, Chinograph pencil, and he made a little
Yeah.
lighting sketch and he put it next to the monitor and went, "Make it look like that." 20 minutes later, they had the shot lit and they were on to something else. But this idea that computers speed up the process, nonsense. They just move the work somewhere else and they make some of the older processes ridiculously slow. And it's just the mythology that these companies that have the money to develop this stuff also have an enormous amount of money to promote it. And the promotion is not always honest. So, this whole thing about, oh, well, AI can do this for you and AI can do that for you, I don't buy it for a nanosecond. And I think that what is hidden just below the surface on all of this is exceptionally dangerous. And I think people should steer well clear of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're talking about in a general way, and definitely the environmental impact of data centers and how
It's
much energy they consume,
horrific. It's
the
horrific. It's
carbon
not just
footprint, so
environmental,
on.
it's the social impact. It's the
It's
social
terrible.
impact of it.
But is there something? But is there something to be said? Although I understand the argument that you just mentioned in terms of the tools, like you need to know what you want to make. You need to know what you intend, what your intent. You have to approach it with intention, right?
Mhm.
But do you think there's still perhaps a good healthy argument if we put like the whole atomic AI issue to one side a little bit, just think about it as a tool that
Well, in the same way that
uh,
there are good arguments for nuclear power as a tool, there are plenty of good arguments. It's just nobody wants to
yeah,
own up to what the half life is of all the waste that is generated, and that people pretend they can't see, or that they used to stick at the bottom of the ocean. You know,
yeah,
the degree to which we miniaturize the public face of a technology or of a process, and it looks nice and shiny and I can use it on a little device here and I don't have to see the mountain of shit that's being created for somebody else, because I get to
yeah,
do my homework on an AI app. And we need to be realistic about that. We're not at a point in the history of the planet we live on that we can carry on doing this. We know what the cobalt mining does. We know what the issues are with, uh, you know, the coups that are having to take place to give access to minerals and natural resources so everybody
yes,
can have another convenience device. We need to stop doing this. And the storytellers we are part of the family of storytellers, are part of that ecosystem to try and make it that when we are going down an extremely dangerous, unwise path, we start talking about it. And we have that. That's why we have mythology. That's why we have fairy tales. That's why we have whatever we
Right.
have as storytellers. And we are
Yeah.
not in a vacuum as animation artists. And if we genuinely care about the future of the industry, if we care more about the future of the industry than the future of the planet, what's wrong with that picture? There isn't an industry if there isn't a planet. I hate to make the statement of the obvious, but you
Yeah.
know, we have to stop just assuming that from the consumer point of view of like, oh, I've downloaded a new app and it's so clever and it makes everything so fast. Well, yes, but at what expense? And I think that we really need to be the conversation we need to be having is don't drink the Kool-Aid, because it is bucket after bucket of Kool-Aid that we're being fed about AI in all the industries. And I think it's phenomenally dangerous.
Yeah. It's not just the animation entertainment industry. I'm to be honest, I'm much more concerned about other areas.
But these are all
Of,
interconnected. They're not separate. This is the whole point, is that they are designed so that everything that you are doing in the innocent side of things is quietly feeding this great big monster thing what we do in the entertainment industry is not disconnected from what happens in the weapons industry. Just look at the connections between the corporations. It's not these things are not distinct from one another. And we are the people who are asked to sell the public face in many instances of these corporate exercises, which are extremely damaging. So I think people need to be aware. Don't take the sales pitch for granted on any of this, please.
yeah. I, I think it's definitely a good idea to ask the questions and do the research and try and understand how this functions and how it works and what it is at the end of the day.
And why it was
And
developed in the first instance.
right, and
Be
like
honest.
you've touched on, yeah, you've touched on this a little bit, but it's also, I mean, unfortunately, it is the state of affairs of, I don't know what it is, big corporations, but with so many other things, your smartphone,
Mhm.
your computers, your cars, your whatever. There's so much.
Well, look at
The
look at the
deliveries
recent look at the recent debate about second screen viewing on Netflix. The writers are being put under pressure to make dialogue
yeah,
repetitive so that the people who
yes,
are watching the TV screen, who also have a laptop open and a mobile phone at the same time,
yeah.
we need to be conscious of the fact that this
That's
is not healthy.
yeah,
And Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, anybody that is troubled by any of this stuff or curious about it, even if people disagree with my take on it, please read Rutger Bregman on ChatGPT, read Jonathan Haidt on the smartphone technologies and the terrible
yeah.
correlation.
My wife is actually reading The Anxious Generation as we speak right now, and I think I'm going to pick it up from her. But what I wanted to say is, like, just outside of that, I think that the whole thing. I was watching the Matt Damon and Matt Damon and Ben Affleck interview. They were talking about their production company and something or other. A hit, I think, is the last project that they did. Anyway, um, and were mentioning this, like, the writers have to be conscious about, because people, when they're watching Netflix, they're flipping, and in my mind, it's like, where does this end? Like, where is the line that common sense finally kicks in? And this is just a little example of how, like, okay, I'll talk about something else that's closer maybe to what I do daily. Let's talk about YouTube, right? So, for example, YouTube is as brilliantly magnificent as it is terrible simultaneously, right? So, and most of social media, for that matter. And when there is when there is an attempt to fit, the square peg in the round hole, once something grows beyond a certain limit where you cannot moderate it anymore, you need algorithms to decide to do whatever. And then those algorithms are tuned for advertisers and not really to give you a quality feed. Then you're on a highway to nowhere in my mind. So
Mhm.
where does this end? Every social media platform, and most people have several, or they're on everything. If you really look at your Instagram feed, look at your Facebook, look at your TikToks, whatever, look at your LinkedIn news feed, and try and remember who are the people or the companies. Let's talk about LinkedIn for a sec. Who are people or companies that you were really excited about last week, and you followed them, and you really wanted to see stuff that they are working on, and stuff that stuff doesn't pop up. And so often you go, oh, this is interesting, I'm going to subscribe to this. YouTube, same, I'm going to subscribe to this. And then you never see, you never get offered things that those people post, right? Because the algorithm thinks that it's going to be a little bit more, we're going to keep you in because it's calculating that, retention, this and that. And actually, if I feed you this, I think that it's going to be, it's not really prioritizing any sort of quality experience for the end user, in my mind, and from
Well,
my
because that's
like
because
person,
that's
very.
not that because that's not what it was designed to do. All these things
Yes,
are
it's
extremely good
and
at doing what they were designed to do, but they are sold to us as having been designed to do something utterly cuddly and friendly and colorful and, oh, this
yes,
is so wonderful and this is going to make the
yes,
quality of life better
yes,
for you. But that's how
yeah.
you sell everything.
and and it really makes me quite angry,
So,
because uh,
do you know the Adam Curtis documentaries, The Century of the Self?
no.
Narrated by Michael Palin, four-part documentary, The Century of the
Okay.
Self. It's available on YouTube, since we're talking about YouTube, and it tells you everything you need to know about how far down the river we had been sold even before any of this started. And I think that
Yeah.
one of the things I'm lucky about is that I was born when I was born, and I have lived this long. In my grandfather's generation in Scotland, the average life expectancy for a male
Oh, sure.
in the city of
Yeah.
Glasgow was 55. I'm now nearly
Yeah.
65, and he died when he was 52 of contaminated water that there was no antibiotics, there was no cure for. And, we are at a point where we are being encouraged to ignore history. That's what is
Yeah.
happening in these technologies. Is don't like it's the old conjuring trick. It's get people to look over here so they won't see what you're doing over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that this whole thing is so, it's designed to be addictive. And they're all running around saying, it's like in that documentary, The Social Dilemma. Oh, if only I had known. It's like, oh, really? Like you
Yeah.
didn't you
You
didn't
really.
pause
Yeah.
for,
Oh,
there was
yes.
never a conversation while this has been developed with, like, is there any chance that this could have a negative effect? It's like, just,
Yeah.
the
This
expectation that
is
people will buy into that nonsense is, but they don't have, I mean, it works the way sugar works. Sugar is
sure.
nutritionally not good for us. And
Yeah.
Scotland's mercantile wealth is rooted in sugar slavery. I grew up,
Right.
we had Robertson's marmalade and jam, which,
Hmm.
you could collect the labels, which had a gollywog. Can you imagine anything so racist? You had this little black figure, and you sent enough of those to Robertson's, and you got a little enamel gollywog to
Like,
wear to
oop,
school. And
oop.
I that was in the 1960s. I grew up in an atmosphere of total lack of apology about Britain's and Scotland's colonial past. Scotland
Yeah.
is only in an economic and political union with the government in Westminster because we bankrupted ourselves trying to colonize Panama. So the idea that, and we were part of the destabilization of the north of Ireland, and we were, nothing that we do in any area of art, of theater, of cinema, of animation, of literature, of music, none of that exists separately from politics. And if you don't
Sure.
believe me, Go and look who's in jail in any of the countries that are despotic or authoritarian. The first people to be thrown in jail are the cartoonists, the stand-up comedians, this stuff is
Yeah,
powerful, and it is known and understood to be powerful. So if you can hypnotize all of the people who are in the arts so that they are 24 hours a day addicted to your algorithmic technology, job done.
yeah,
So
and
don't buy the Kool-Aid and
yeah,
don't drink the Kool-Aid. There is nothing to prevent anybody from getting a piece of paper and a pencil and doing, there is, don't buy into it. This is not
or
the mythology of inevitability about this
yeah,
technology is so powerful. And we
yeah,
just
and,
need to
or
not
whatever.
feed
I
into
just
it.
wanted to say, or whatever their version of a pencil and a piece of paper is, you know,
Mhm.
whatever industry or creative industry or whatever their passion is. I think there's definitely so many ways of connecting to other human beings, whether it's an audience or a collaborator, and
Totally.
in a personal. Kind of, for lack of a better word, analog way. But just to take a quick step back, I think uh, the thing that also feels like the root cause of my anger, in a sense, not just the I don't know, malefic intentions of these CEOs and these big companies, but it's being shoved this idea down my throat that bigger is better, more is better, more, bigger, more, bigger. And as a consumer, and also as, let's say, an entrepreneur, right? Let's say if you're a creative entrepreneur, let's say if you want to create your own studio, you want to make your own thing. Maybe you're thinking about attracting some investment, some money. All the conversations are going to be, how do we, whatever, 10x this? How do we do that? How do we, like, more is better? And in terms of being a consumer or member of the passionate at that member of the audience,
Yeah.
it's like more, more, more. Here's more. Here's more.
Yeah.
Not necessarily good, but more is better, right? Here's more. There's statistics about how many new videos are posted on YouTube daily. Wow, isn't that amazing? No, it's not. How many new songs are uploaded to Spotify, and these poor artists get crumbs,
Mhm.
from of the revenues that Spotify gets, and all the intermediaries and so on. Wow, isn't that great? No, it's not great. It's not great because then it becomes. I think U2 has a good line. I forget what the name of the song is, but the line goes something like this: your body is not a canvas anymore. Your body is a toilet wall. Speaking of tattoos, and
Yeah.
like, if you get a tattoo that is meaningful to you, cool, you'll have one or maybe two. But if you're tattooed kind of all over, like, what does that really mean, right? I think that's kind of like the hope. I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth or
Well,
misinterpret this,
there's
but that's how I see it. And it's the same here. Like, it becomes, these platforms are like brotherly graves of, I don't know, broken dreams. People, so many people they're trying to. I don't know. I'm going to join the creator economy, and it's
I
fine.
think
That's
I
great, but it just doesn't function. It's dysfunctional.
it is, and I last year was asked to give a TEDx talk in a town called Ajijic next to Lake Chapala, and what I chose to talk about was putting the benefits of creativity in the hands of the people who do the creative work. But for that to be possible, one of the things that I think we need to move away from is this cult of personality about the artist, the auteur, the great creator. Because one of the things that is, for me, most amazing about getting to work in animation is it's anonymous. Nobody gives a shit
Mm,
who I am. There's people still
yeah,
watching Roger Rabbit, not because Fraser MacLean worked on it. They're watching it because it
yeah,
still makes you go, oh my goodness, that is so amazing. In the same way that nobody knows the name of the people who designed the stained glass in Rouen Cathedral, but you still walk into it hundreds of years later and just you are overpowered by the experience of the beauty of the place, and you don't know who carved the stone, don't know who did the woodwork. And when you go and listen to an orchestral performance, you're going to listen to find out what was inside Beethoven's head. And for that to be available to you between 45 and 65 instrumental players and singers have to have made a commitment from childhood to
Yeah.
practice 2 or 3 hours a day to get that good at their instrument that we can experience Beethoven's Ninth. And
Right.
sure, you could feed all of that stuff into yet another computer and it could play the thing back and it will sound nothing like what Beethoven wanted it to
Sure.
sound like because of the total absence of humanity and humility. And I think that this whole notion of trying to, like, the next big thing as or the next big
Hmm.
industry, we need as many meaningful, substantial, good quality next small things put together by communities of people, not by some egomaniac who has some
Yeah.
messiah complex and wants to, put their face on all the posters. Just turn up, do the work, shut up, get on with it, and make it beautiful. It's not about you. The whole thing is creating an experience for a social group, for an audience that is paying attention and that is
Yeah.
not being distracted while they are trying to concentrate. How many concerts have you been to in the last 10 years where people are not recording it on their phone? How many
Yeah.
child
They're not.
performances in a school?
Yeah, where they're not experiencing these same things through the proxy of their screen,
Yeah,
because they're not actually there. They're filming it and they're experiencing it through
but
their own
this
cameras.
is a continuation. My father's specialist subject as a journalist was education. So I
Okay.
grew up, and my mother's campaigning work was prison reform. You want to know how much crossover there is between the penal system and the education system? Because they are
I would
both
I would
about
guess quite a bit.
control. The whole
Yeah.
idea of compulsory education grew out of the Industrial Revolution. It was not to
Yes.
make people's lives better or richer. It was so there would be a sober,
Factory workers.
literate, numerate, punctual, obedient workforce. And it was only through other people with a vision that coal miners in Wales had access to really good libraries, or that, there were people trying to make it that poverty didn't have to be synonymous with ignorance in the same way that tremendous wealth doesn't have to be synonymous with the
Yeah.
levels of ignorance that most wealthy, powerful people are happy to parade today. We have a lot of people now who have got where they are through ambition, not through humility or learning, but through just
Hmm.
cold, vicious, predatory ambition. And
Yes.
we should not be encouraging that.
Yes.
These are
On
not
any level.
virtues in any
Yes.
interest industry.
If we're talking about, whether we're talking about politicians or whether we're talking about CEOs of companies, or even, let's stepping back a little bit, maybe back into the animation realm, because I feel like we've derailed a tad, but it's all connected.
My issue is that the animation realm is so up its own ass. There's so many people in animation whose only frame of reference is animation. And the people who made Snow White, their frame of reference was so much broader because there was so
Yes.
little animation at the time that Snow White was made. And what
Yeah.
we've got now is that it's possible for people to live an entire day without separating themselves from animated content. And that's not good.
Yeah, and also I remember years ago when I really started getting, because my background is, I don't draw, for example. I'm not an illustrator, and I didn't start in animation, right? I started live action, wanted to be live action director. Then later on, I thought, okay, I want to be Brad Bird. If that guy can pivot between Mission Impossible and the Iron Giant and all those,
Yeah.
like, wow, that's who you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, but I started getting really, really into it. I was so frustrated of the quality of preschool content on TV. Like, wow, surely we can do better than this,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not saying that Tom and Jerry is necessarily preschool and it ticks, all the boxes, but I grew up watching pirated VHS tapes
of Tom and
in
Jerry.
1990s post-Soviet,
Uh-huh.
Moldova,
Yeah.
of Tom and Jerry and all these different things that we got. I don't know how we got those tapes, and I was watching them with my dad, and it was like huge kind of bonding. One of my earliest, most beautiful memories, right? And I remember seeing this style of animation, then getting more into like, oh my god, and discovering all these things, and obviously later, the Looney Tunes and all that, and how clever they were, and how funny the jokes were, and how beautifully uh, um, drawn and also score. Like Tom and Jerry, I always felt like the score and the music and the musical gags that they would have, amazing, just top notch, second to
Hmm.
none, right?
Yep.
And then as an adult, I'm watching this stuff on the same channels, as it were. Now we have the channels, we didn't have them, and I'm like, how is this any good? How is this the standard? Is this? And then I got into the industry proper, and I started, going to markets and talking to people and trying to get a grasp of how things are actually done and how things are actually made. And I think it's a similar issue of where projects become a regurgitation of a regurgitation
Oh
of a
yeah,
regurgitation of a regurgitation,
they do.
because the KPIs and the metrics that they use have nothing to do
What's a
with
what's a KPI?
basically the thing you want to hit, the result, right?
But what
What
does it
you're
stand
aiming
for?
for. Having a
Is it
bit of an
something
English as a second.
index, knowledge, product
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
index,
yeah.
or
I'm having a bit of
I'm
an
trying to
English as a
imagine
second language moment. Key performance indicator. There you go.
key performance indicator. Okay.
Yeah. So, and all of those are not based, or not even in the vicinity of, let's make something cool, let's make something wholesome, let's make something beautiful, let's make something for the kids,
Yeah.
let's make something that will endure. It's structured always as a business, which has its place for sure, has its place, and
Yeah.
I love thinking about it that way. And we had Ken on, and he's a master at seeing the puzzle pieces and fitting the puzzle together and so on, and sometimes drawing the damn puzzle if it's not there. And that's a
Hmm.
big thing, and it's you know obviously super important and valid. But in terms of, and also to Ken's merit as an example, I think more people should function this way. He, like, as Justine put it in our conversation with her, like, he has a good eye for
Hmm.
what a good project is.
Sure.
Not just in terms of what's going to be, but what's original, what has good heart behind it. And I've seen Ken choose projects that really fit that criteria many times. And not everybody does that, by the way. But when you start just from that, okay, I don't know how many, what sort of licensing and merchandising opportunities does this
So the licensing and
particular
merchandising.
IP,
So the licensing and merchandising thing is really crucial for people to understand. So the reason why all the early short format animation in the American studios is named after a musical format, silly symphonies, merry melodies, Looney Tunes, is because that was the only way of making a profit. When
they
you
were
went
selling
to
the
see
records.
that, well, they were selling sheet music originally, and if you go
Oh,
back
really?
to the Three Little Pigs, so the Three Little Pigs, when that was in the cinemas were the only. Are you hearing the dogs barking? Should I close the window?
No, no, no. It's good. It's all right
Okay.
because
So
we're on the
here's
headphones.
the thing: when that was released in the 1930s, a cinema ticket in the United States was 25 cents. And for that 25 cents, you got to see the A movie, the B movie. You could stay in the
Right.
cinema all day and you could watch on a loop the A movie, the B movie, a travelogue, a newsreel, and a cartoon. How much of that 25 cents do you think Disney got back? And how much of
Yeah.
it, how long did it take? Because they were doing something through who owned the cinema. They had a distribution deal with
Yeah.
RKO. But if the audience went round the corner whistling "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" and they bought the sheet music, that money was in Disney's bank account 2 weeks later because they owned the IP for the song. So they front loaded Snow White and Bambi with songs. So and also up until Shrek, there was no Academy Award for a feature made by animators, but there was an Academy Award for a song. So the only way that Disney could
Yeah.
be on the radar as an Academy Award winning studio for features was through music. But the other thing which I learned while I was working at Warner Brothers and Disney in the USA, um, Kay Kamen, who was the guy who was the marketing genius for Walt and Roy Disney, and this is another important thing. There are countless biographies of Walt. There is
And not on
only
Roy?
one of Roy
One.
because
Okay.
nobody thinks this stuff is sexy or interesting or important. Without this, without the Happy Meals toys and the T-shirts and the all that other stuff,
Yeah.
you lose your crew to another studio because you don't have enough revenue between the larger projects to keep them employed.
You gotta
And the only
feed
reason
the
Disney
beast,
went
keep them
uh,
employed. Yeah.
the only reason Walt and Roy went into character merchandising was because there was a flood of pirate merchandising of Mickey and Minnie Mouse dolls, which were often made badly. Two bad things. If a child pulls the nose off Minnie Mouse and chokes on
And
it,
then
that's going to
chokes on it.
be
Yeah.
really tragic. And the money is going to the pirates. It's not going to the company to keep their, because they're investing so much. Between 1936 and 1937, the Disney in house training budget was $65,000. So every time they brought artists in, they were making a gigantic investment in their education. It wasn't just, and Pixar has a university. There is a Pixar university. That if you look
Mhm.
at this intelligently, it's not just how can we get rich, it's how can we enrich. And if you listen to Brian McDonald, who has a wonderful series of books and he gives story classes at Pixar, fantastic podcasts, great interviews, his argument boiled down is very often that we share stories to share survival information. And that is
Great.
demonstrated by Marc Azema in his book La Préhistoire du Cinéma. They know now that all of those multiple image cave paintings, why are they all seen from the side? Because the only
It's an
people 17,000 years ago who knew what one of those creatures looked like from in front didn't live long enough to paint a picture of them. It's survival information. And all of these things are cycles of
instructions.
movement.
Yeah.
And they when the firelight starts, they come to life and you see the movement. So the reason, and those were multimedia experiences. The highest concentration of painted images in Lascaux and in Altamira are at the point in the cave systems that is most acoustically alive, and they know from the bone instruments that they've found. So animation, it predates cinema by thousands of years, and it is there to help people survive the world that they live in. And Ben Okri, the British Nigerian writer, there's a great quote from him. He said, "A people are as healthy and confident as the stories they tell themselves. Sick storytellers can make nations sick. Without stories, we would go mad. Life would lose its moorings or orientations. Stories can conquer fear. They can make the heart larger." That's Ben Okri. And you mentioned Iron Giant. Do you know who wrote the original Iron Man story? And do you know why he wrote the story?
No.
It was written by Ted Hughes, who was married to Sylvia Plath, who committed suicide. And Ted Hughes wrote a series of stories for his children to help them through the trauma of the loss of their mother and to help them
Yeah.
acclimatize to the evils of the world. And when it was adapted by, do you know why Brad Bird chose that story?
Yeah.
Because he lost his sister to gun violence. His sister was shot dead by her ex husband. And the whole idea of what if a gun had a soul, what if a gun could choose not to fire, meant something to Brad Bird.
Yeah.
That was not to sell toys. And that movie did not,
Yeah.
it's like Shawshank Redemption. It did not do well at the
Yeah.
box office when it came out. But the man who wrote the story and the man who directed the movie both
Wow.
had a personal vested interest
Yeah.
in that story. And that to me is a really extraordinary example of the marriage of the medium of animation for a wide universal family audience that touches on an eternal and absolutely important theme. And I think if people fully understood why that movie came into existence, they would take away even more than they already do from it. But I think what we should take away from all these things is the example of why we do this. And if the only reason we do this is competitive and is to make
Yeah,
ourselves rich and make ourselves famous, we should be ashamed of ourselves. That's not what this medium is for. And it's not what the medium of orchestral music is for. It's not what poetry is for. It's not what nutrition is for. We have gone a long way down a really bad path, and animation has played a part in sending people down that tunnel. And we need to stop doing it. We need to get people thinking morally and ethically. And this is why the Rutger Bregman books and his School of Moral Ambition are so interesting and so important, because there is somebody out there saying when you choose to go into a particular profession because of particular skills, do you really
hmm
want to be making the world a worse place just because it makes you
yeah,
more comfortable? Or do you want to be doing something useful, productive, optimistic, and positive with your skills? And I think that is how we should be trying to motivate people, not just, oh, can I be the next whatever?
yeah.
Be a mensch, as Billy Wilder put it.
Yeah,
Be a good person. And if people don't know your name, and if you're doing it so people will congratulate you, and people will tell you how wonderful and how generous and how kind and how socially aware you are, screw that as well. That shouldn't be your motivation. Your motivation should just be doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that applies more to storytellers than to just about anybody else, because we have people's behavior in the palm of our hands,
hmm
children's behavior. And we need to recognize that that is a responsibility. There is no such thing as a creative freedom or any other kind of freedom that does not come with a responsibility. And our responsibility right now is outside the window staring us in the face. That's what we are supposed to be addressing, not whether or not we can get the next mega series on streaming or whatever.
yeah,
That shouldn't be our motivation, in my view.
yeah, yeah. That's very well put. And I have to say that I made a little bit of a prophecy at the beginning of this conversation that I am certainly learn new things, and I am glad to let you know that I have. So thank you.
I'm very
And
grateful for the invitation. I'm sorry I'm on such a soapbox about so many things, but
not at all, not at all. And
I don't want this coming generation of animation artists, technicians, writers, producers. I'm not doing what they are paying me to do as a mentor, as a teacher, if I am lining them up to get ripped off the way we got ripped off and to wind up doing. I am ashamed of the amount of time that I spent selling breakfast cereal. And I am
yeah,
proud of the fact that the Latin American countries were among the first to draw a line and make it illegal to use
yes,
animated cartoon characters to help children get further into the diabetes and obesity epidemic.
yeah,
That should never have been something that cartoons were involved in, but it was. And I'm ashamed
yeah,
that that was a big part of how I paid the rent in the 80s and 90s. And I want them to have the opportunity, here in Mexico in particular, to create a kinder, more compassionate industry that will not use them up and spit them out.
yeah. I mean, that's beautiful. That's great. And going back to your earlier argument, I wholeheartedly agree. I always have this example that I think whatever time an audience gives you, whatever it is, I was thinking about it a lot when I was younger in terms of a cinema going experience, right?
Mhm.
So, and I always keep bringing this up is when if let's say you've made something and somebody, and it's beside the point how much they pay for the ticket, but somebody decides to give you 2 hours of their life, 2 hours where they could have done anything else,
Mhm.
a number of different things, right? finally they had to figure out a babysitter and all that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's their first night away in a long time. They could have had a nice dinner. They could have gone for a walk. They could have, I don't know, rented a hotel room and get some alone time. Whatever, a million different things, right?
And they came
But
to
they
see
chose,
your
and
movie.
they came to see something you made. So you have to treat that time that they give you as something sacred, something really, 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 really important.
Can I make a point?
And yeah,
So there is this mythology that there are two different types of money. There's clean money, which comes from subsidies and government money and whatever, and there's
right.
dirty money, which comes from the box office and the
Uh-huh.
merchandising.
Okay.
Okay, rubbish. If a government has a fund to encourage animation, like the National Film Board of Canada or
That's
the French
great.
government or wherever, where does that money come from? It comes from taxation or the lottery. And the lottery is simply a more
Yeah.
cynical, cruel version of taxation.
Yes.
So the money that you are spending on your arty project that's sharing your terrible existential torment with an audience at a festival is being paid for by somebody cleaning the floor in a hospital, driving a truck, cleaning a sewer, digging at
Yep.
whatever, and you have the arrogance to go and make a movie that you think that audience can't understand or that they won't appreciate.
Yes.
If you're using those
Yeah.
people's money to make your movie, they'd better want to go and see your movie on a Friday night. And you better
That's a
not stand up at
great
any
way.
festival and go, oh,
Yes.
well, of course, the mainstream audience just doesn't understand me. They
That's a
understand you
great way of
perfectly,
thinking
bitch.
about
They
it.
know
Yes.
because it's their money you're spending. And the other thing is this whole thing about sharing your pain with an audience. You know what? Those people sitting out there in the dark have their own
Have their
pain.
own pain.
And most of
Yeah.
it is much more real and immediate than yours. So,
Yeah.
this idea that entertainment is part of the bread and circuses thing is an insult to everybody who has ever understood the purpose of drama, comedy or
Yeah.
tragedy. And I was so lucky because, as a part benefit of being the son of a journalist who's specialist with education, I grew up in Edinburgh. We have this amazing international arts festival at the end of August and beginning of September every year. And
Oh,
my
right.
dad's
Yeah.
newspaper got free tickets. And my mother wrote reviews, my father wrote reviews. They would never, once they knew that I was interested in art and theatre and cinema, they never used both tickets. I always got one ticket. So I got to
Hmm.
see Laurence Olivier play Shylock. I got to see Janet Baker and Cosi fan
Oh,
Tutte. I got
wow.
to see the Japanese Bunraku puppet theater for nothing as a child. If I got all of
Yeah.
that for all those years as a child and a teenager, it is beholden on me to give back because I didn't pay for any of that. I spent more time in the theater and the concert hall as a child than I spent in the cinema. And the frame of reference for most people in the animation industry today is Wall Street and the animation industry. They're not
Right.
cultured
Yeah.
conversations that you tune into. And what we have is two different tribes of people who go to Annecy or who go to Kids Screen or who go to this. You have all the creative and technical people going, I hope I find somebody to give me the money to make my project. And usually it's only one project, which gives you an idea of their business savvy that you can
Hmm.
actually survive on one project. And then there's a whole
Yeah.
bunch of other people who went to business school who are looking for creative and technical talent that they can fuck over and exploit. And that is a very dysfunctional chemistry. And what we need to do is get production training, merchandising, exhibition, contract law training into the curriculum under the same roof as Thomas Hagler did at the Film Academy in Ludwigsburg, where you have one stream of students learning creative skills, one stream of students learning technical skills, and a distinct group of students learning to be production managers, contract lawyers, accountants,
Yeah.
producers, because we have no hope in hell of creating a truly self respecting, compassionate, self sustaining industry if we stick to the lion and the antelope model that we have at the moment, which is designed to be predatory and it's designed to keep all the money above the line and push everybody else below the line into service positions so they have no profit participation. And we need to be training people to understand this because if you can't be honest about your history, how can you be realistic about your future?
Yeah.
doesn't happen. So do
Yes.
the homework. Don't
Mm-hmm.
just go in there going, oh, I want to be successful. I want to be rich. I want everybody to know my name. I want all these emojis and hearts on social media.
Yeah.
Do your job, which is not just to get famous and receive praise. Do your job in an area of art and communication that is absolutely sublime and influential and magnificent, and don't sell yourself or the medium short. Shame on you if you do, because the world is in a terrible state and it needs what we do
Needs
more
good.
than a lot of people realize, because these skills are, they're relevant in cancer research, they're relevant in urban planning, they're relevant in deep space exploration, they're relevant in climate modeling. The world is interacting with animated narrative content 24 hours a day, and that content is having an impact. If you don't believe me, read Rutger Bregman, read Jonathan Haidt, read Aristotle, for God's sake. Read the people who actually bothered to study why human beings share information in this way. And as Brian McDonald argues, we do it to help one another survive, not to help one
Yeah.
another get rich and rip somebody off in the process.
Fraser, one last thing.
Yes.
Everybody who comes
Why am
on,
I such an
I
asshole?
know. No, 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 not at all. Everybody who comes on, I ask them the same question. This community, and by the way, probably each of the bigger topics that we kind of sort of bumped into,
Yeah.
I'm sure we can spend hours just
Oh,
on
yeah, for sure.
separate on those separate topics.
That's what Annecy's
Um,
for.
Yes, exactly. So I ask everybody, this community, we're talking about social media and so on, and algorithms and all those issues that we touched upon. I've building it to sort of circumvent those issues and to create an honest space that is not run by algorithms and is
Mhm.
actually useful. And so if you were tasked with pinning a note to the door of the Toon room. Let's say, for the sake of the metaphor, we can think about people who are, just like you were talking now, stepping into the industry, thinking about, okay, this is something that I want to do. Maybe they're developing some skills, maybe they're learning, have really no idea what the industry is or how it functions or dysfunctions. Is that a word?
Mhm.
Um, what would that note say?
Happiness is not something you chase after, it's something you can generate.
Okay.
Too many kids that I speak to, it's like, I'll be happy if I get a job at Pixar. I'll be happy if I
Yeah.
get to work on a big anime project. I'll be happy if. I'll be happy if means you haven't understood happy. If I'll
Mhm.
be happy is some mythical pot of gold at the end of some big long rainbow, and you have to elbow all these people out of the way to get to that pot of gold. A lot of what is waiting for you is not your perfect job. And a lot of
Yeah.
what is waiting for you is toxic environments full of dysfunctional people. And you have not only to survive that yourself, you have to help the people around you to survive that. Otherwise, don't do it.
Yeah.
You're not going out into Walton's Mountain. This is not the Garden of Eden. This is a really difficult context to work in. And you have to take with you the idea that even if you're having a bad day, you can be the source of happiness for somebody who's having an
Oh
even
yeah.
worse day in the room.
Oh yeah.
So don't chase happiness, generate happiness, because you are going to need it, and you can actually generate happiness without you yourself getting all the things that are on your wish list. And if you are careful about the definition of happiness and you relate it to the principle of kindness to all people, including yourself, you're going to have a much better
Yeah.
time in your 40, 45-year career in any of
Yeah.
these industries. That would be my advice.
I love that, and I agree. I really like that expression. It's a bit of a trope, I suppose, but by this point, but it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Amen.
Um, I really like that. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Um, my friend, thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really grateful for the chance to just spout all my usual and another thing and another thing.
No, I think it was like honestly, uh, this is why I'm doing this from very selfish reason of I want to dig into these things. I love hearing people talk about these sorts of things.
I would love
And
just before we say bye bye cheerio, I'd really love to name check some of the people that have set just I'll not get everybody, but there have been so many people who have shown me such kindness and who have devoted so much time and energy to helping in different contexts for different reasons. The guy who was my art teacher, Mike Gill, Christine Edzard, who was the director producer that I worked for in live action just before I joined Roger Rabbit. Chris Knott, who is the great unsung hero of the visual effects on Roger Rabbit, wasn't even mentioned, even
mm,
though he designed the whole system that made the characters look three-dimensional. Alan Dewhurst and Andrew Ruman, the guys that ran Passion Pictures, the opportunities that they provided. Jill Purdom. I never worked for Purdom Studio, but Jill Purdom is one of the producers who gave tremendous protective advice to me and my students. Alison Abati and Ron Tipp, who were the producers that I worked for on Space Jam. There were so many people on Tarzan at the upper levels that are known names, but one of the people who really helped me kind of survive everything on that production was Tom Baker, who was the head of the scene planning
yeah,
department and was always on the lookout for the welfare of everybody around him at a time when there was a bit of a feeding frenzy going on. And Jackie McKenzie, who created the Dare to Be Digital training for animation artists for the video game industry, which has been a huge help and inspiration to me. James Williams and Christine Belson at Sony, who helped us 10 years ago to put together something called the Animation Basecamp, and to Andres Buzo and Andres Palma, and to Carla Vasquez, the team that I work for at Escuela Escena, and people like Vinny Morales and all my colleagues, where we're trying to make available to the new generation, the next chapter of animation history, as much information and to create as many connections as we can internationally and locally to give these kids the best possible opportunity of having a controlling interest in the industry that they're going out into and that they're going to help to shape. There are
yeah,
lots of people that I should have mentioned as well, but it's so easy in these contexts to forget that there are people that really need their own little credit list because
of
I've
course.
and also Emily Haynes and Shona Burns and Matt Robinson, the people at Chronicle Books that helped get Setting the Scene into existence,
Hmm.
and all the people who were of such help to me along the way. And whoever I've forgotten, I haven't forgotten you
Yeah.
for real. I just don't have your name on the tip of my tongue. But I think that's the thing is don't forget, like you were saying, it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. Just stay in touch with the people who help you.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but don't just drop them and move on. Keep saying thank you
Yeah.
for as long as you have their phone number.
Yeah, for as long as you can. Yes,
Yeah.
and just to connect those dots where you were saying, look, and you're probably forgetting unwillingly some people, but you are a product of other people's kindness.
Oh,
It gets you where you are, right? So
yeah.
it's all the more, and you when you are really grateful, truly grateful about it, it's humbling. But what's also empowering is you can put yourself in that position and you can help other people. You can be generous with other people. You can be nice. You can be supportive. You can pay it forward,
It's
etc., etc.,
crucial.
etc.
It's
for them.
crucial because it
And
has for a
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes, it's insane how little it takes to have an impact in somebody's life. Just a little
Completely.
bit of positive reinforcement, a pat on the back can do miracles. Can be life changing sometimes in some situations. So it's
Totally.
not a huge effort. That's
I
what it
should
doesn't
mention. I should
necessarily
mention
need
also.
to be.
You probably won't be watching, but Dorian Mastin, who was the guy who invited me to come and live and work in Mexico in the first instance, and um, to so many other people who've made things possible in what appears to be from the outside sometimes a desert. Will Adams and Rory Lowe, the guys, and Elaine McElroy, who helped us with the animation base camp 10 years ago, and Mike Owens and Wendy Owens in Minnesota, who are doing extraordinary work at the moment with the Nice Moves organization. That's a great example in the Twin Cities. A group of people who work in
Hmm.
animation getting together to support one
Yeah,
another through community. And right
yeah,
now in Minnesota, that matters. And what they are working on at the moment is a project that is helping people survive the terrible things that are going down in Minnesota and so many other places. And they are animators taking that opportunity. So the world that is full of very good, kind examples of people who are not just on the make. And I
yeah.
think that that's to be celebrated and encouraged.
Yes. And on that positive note, thank you so very much for
Thanks,
for
Alex.
doing
It's
this.
really nice to see you and to talk to you. And yeah, have a very
Yes.
good day. And un abrazo fuerte from Guadalajara.
Okay, like right back at you. Speak
Take
soon.
care.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.